Okay, so as I said, good morning, and this is the California 4-H Professional Development Webinar Series. And today's session, we'll be discussing strategies for working with angry parents and moving them from angry to being your ally and advocate. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. All right, so everyone should see the screen. You can just nod. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, thank you for doing that. So in the past, I've called this session From Daggers to Donuts because I had this situation where I worked in a before and after school age childcare program, and I had a parent who would come in every day and just be really angry and defensive and disruptive with the staff. She continued to be really unsatisfied and rude and derogatory. So by the time it got to my desk, I worked with her using some of these strategies and really turned that parent into someone who became one of our biggest advocates, and she brought donuts every day, every Monday of the week in the morning and before school care. So it just became a pattern and a habit. So really turned this really disruptive parent into someone who really supported the staff and worked with them. So I'm hoping that you can use some of these strategies that I'm going to present today working with parents or training your volunteers to work with parents. So I will be sharing the slide deck with all of my notes with you, and you're welcome to use it, however, to help your community club leaders or other key volunteers to use these strategies when they're working with parents as well. Okay, so I'm going to present these as a sequence. They're numbered, but it's not sequential to make it work. So the strategies do work best in combination with each other, but not all situations require this step-by-step kind of strategy, because some parents will move really easily or quickly to understanding that you're on the same page or on the same team, right? And you're all trying to work toward what's best for the child, regardless of it's, you or the parent. And so you can skip steps or don't use steps depending on the situation. And so just don't hold it, to the task that it has to be 1, 2, 3, 4 through 7. Okay, so in general. So, and then above all, throughout this, or when they're working with parents, you do you. And I tell this to everyone I'm working with and volunteers. So, and that really just means be authentic in the way that you share care and concern with a parent. And even when you're on the phone, simple things like smiling when it's appropriate and at the right time. You can hear smiling through the phone, right? And so if you just make yourself smile even when you're on the phone, the parent will hear that care and concern if you're dealing with things over the phone. Okay, so let's get started. So connecting with people and parents by remaining calm, of course, initially. Welcoming their inquiry or concern, giving them credit for being a good and involved parent, and even congratulating them for bringing these to your attention. Because sometimes I think that starts the diffusion part of it. And so some kinds of responses you can use are things like, I'm so glad you called. Thank you for meeting with me. Thanks for bringing this to my attention. And then sometimes it's obviously you're calling because you're concerned about your daughter. Some parents don't take the time. We need your input if we're going to be successful. So this immediately kind of can disarm a parent because they think you're going to, argue with them or say, yes, but, a lot of times we say the yes, but right away, and we try to go right to solution instead of trying to join with the parent first. So you want to make sure that you're diffusing the anger by joining with the parent initially and actually really congratulating them or thanking them for bringing this issue to their attention. So and this is where I think at the end of these examples, I'm just going to ask for your kinds of input too. What other strategies have you used and share with your colleagues? I'm going to stop share so we can, or actually just chat in the chat pod. Other ideas that you've had to start to diffuse or start a conversation. If anyone's used one that that's a favorite that works for you. I'll give you a second to chat if you've had one. Does everyone understand how to use the chat pod? It's at the bottom of your screen, should be. None? Okay, we'll just go on. Oh, hang on. There we go. Okay. So the limitation with this is that the more serious the matter is, the harder it is to join and diffuse a parent, right? If it's a really serious thing, it's harder for the parent sometimes to not be angry. It's also sometimes harder for us to relate to the parent if it's a really something that's very serious that the child did and we're trying to work with the parent to get to solution, especially in 4-H where it involves, the potential that the child could be suspended or expelled in those kinds of situations. It's really harder to understand that and to join with the parent. So just take your time in this step and try to find things or strategies that work. So be prepared to revisit the conversation if the parent can't get to rational thinking. So at some point, we've got to get to the parent to be able to have a conversation. And if it just can't happen in the moment and that very first initial one, be prepared to make a new appointment and say, okay, we can see that we're not going to resolve this today. So we're going to just, stop this meeting and let's reschedule a new time so that we can all take a deep breath and understand that we need to get to a place where we can have a rational conversation before we can continue. And I think that's an honest way to approach parents who just can't calm down. They have to have some self-control before we can move on typically. And it's okay to stop a conversation when you understand that it's just really not going to go anywhere, okay? And even if it's just 10 minutes, if you say, if you need to take 10 minutes, why don't you go, I'll buy you a cup of coffee, whatever you need to do to kind of let them remove themselves from the situation and then come back to it, okay? So that's step 1. Step 2 is a listening check. So you want to make sure that as the parent is talking, a lot of times what happens, right, is they'll come in and they've got this huge laundry list of all the things that have gone wrong. There was this situation and that situation, and then my child, and then they start to use the bullying word and they start to use the harassment word, which always gets our attention, right? We want to sit up and kind of take notice when they start using those words. Oftentimes they don't really play out to fit the definition of those in the end, but they start using those words because they're hot button words. And mostly when they use those words, they want someone to listen, right? They want you to pay attention to what they're saying. And so that's the one cue is like, okay, let's make sure that they understand that I'm really listening. But a lot of times they've got a long laundry list. And so it's important at different places to paraphrase or repeat back what you think you heard as a strategy to check on the concern or a theme that you think you're hearing. Because oftentimes what you start to hear is a theme coming up, okay, after they've stacked up all their issues. And if you can get to that theme or that common thread, then we have something we can work on. So some of the phrases that we can use are, so let me see if I'm getting this right. And then you can paraphrase or get down to if you've already heard a theme, okay? Or is what you're saying, whatever, ... And then one of my favorites is when I'm not sure, I could be wrong about this. That's my favorite phrase right there. And I use this with kids too, especially teenagers. I could be wrong about this. I wrote notes that say, blah, blah, whatever it is, ... Did I get that correct? And so using that phrase, I could be wrong about this, gives that parent still that open door to go, no, that's not quite what I'm saying. It's really about this. And then sometimes what that does, even if you're wrong, you're not quite right, then it gets them to focus on naming the theme. Okay. And then you have somewhere to work from. Okay. Does anyone else have others that they've used when you're checking on listening, things that work for you, phrases that work for you? Anybody can type. I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, we'll just move on. All right, with the listening check, of course, there's a danger with listening. It could sound disconnected or overly detached if it's used in the wrong context or the wrong time in the conversation. So sometimes it's like if you're going through this motion of saying, the parent has clearly stated the theme and it's one issue, they haven't rambled on, it's one thing, you go, okay, this is the problem. You can restate it, but then you can move on and make sure you're just, being authentically trying to check for understanding. Like I said, if the situation is very clear, there could be no need to do this step at all. All right, the third step is a temperature check. So asking a parent how they're doing or what they're feeling at a given moment is a way to find an idea with which you can empathize. So sometimes you want to make sure, again, that you use this with caution, all right? And only when it feels like you really need to ask the parent how they're feeling. Sometimes this happens when there's a long silence in a break in the conversation. The parent is thinking or taking a couple deep breaths. If there's a long silence, let that sit there. Silence is okay. You want to, give it a good 30 seconds to a minute, and that can seem like a really long time. But sometimes people that are really upset need that moment to kind of self-regulate and get control of their emotions. And it's okay to have a little bit of silence, but then you want to get the conversation rolling again. And this is a strategy to use when you want to start getting that conversation rolling again. And so just basically asking them, how are you feeling? What's going on right now with you? I wouldn't say it like that, but I would just say, how are you feeling right now? How are you feeling about the situation? How are you feeling about our conversation? Just checking in with them about what's going on. Have they calmed down from the number 10 up there, calling 911, to being more about having good stress? And so you want to get them down to this level 5, right? So having good stress, being stressed is okay because it gets us to solution oftentimes. So that's okay. We want to get them calmed down enough so that we can actually problem solve together. And I see that somebody, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Hang on. Was there a chat? Okay. Oh, Dagmar. Thanks, Dagmar. Okay, good. Yeah, and the thing with these steps, I find that they're easier. Many of you have gone through maybe cruise or conversations. Sometimes that's, for me, that I love that training. So if you haven't had a chance to take it, please do that at some point in your career here with A&R. The trainings come up maybe once every 6 months or less often. So maybe sometimes once a year. So if you see one, get on it right away because they have a limited enrollment and they cap it at like 20 participants. So if you haven't done that, please take that course. But I find that sometimes it's hard to remember that, all the strategies in there, especially if you don't practice them a lot. And so you have to go back and refresh yourself by looking at the books. But these are pretty simple, easy to understand. You can kind of like remember them if you just practice them once or twice, okay? Okay, so like I said, sometimes people need that time to collect themselves, and especially when they're in situations that are upsetting. So check in when you need to about feelings, okay? And then after you've checked in about their feelings, you want to acknowledge those, okay? So simply identifying the feeling that you hear or see as statements, not questions. You're not asking at this point. The last one was asking how they're feeling, and now you're acknowledging. So you're going to make statements about acknowledge them. And they're things like this. It's like you're disappointed, and that's a statement. You sound surprised, okay? And the danger here is that it could be heard as patronizing if done as an analysis rather than stating something that's obvious. So you want to be really careful about knowing what you're checking in with. Right? Like you're pretty confident about reading the room and those feelings. Then it also assumes that people can identify the feeling in the first place, right? And so you may need practice reading affect or feeling tone in people. And then they may need practice even naming their own feelings. And so sometimes that check-in in stage 3 is a way to start to practice naming or checking in to see if you're on the same page about that. And then we want to acknowledge those. Okay, and again, sometimes I use that phrase, I could be wrong about this. I could be wrong about this, but you sound surprised. Okay, and that gives an option for them to say, I'm not really surprised, I'm really more whatever it is. Okay. All right, let's move on. And then number 5 is validate the experience that they're having right now. So now we're moving into that. These steps, this 4, 5, and 6 are really about developing relationship. Now you're going into really starting to develop a relationship or a rapport with the parent and validating that what they're feeling is real, right? And what they're experiencing is real and important to them. And so these are the kinds of things I say in this situation. This must be hard to hear as a parent. And so if you're a parent and you can identify with them as a parent, I understand why you feel that way. Most parents would feel the same. And so then you start to develop a common thing. If you're not a parent, if you're an aunt, if you're another caregiver for a child, you can even use your role, you know, as a professional youth development worker. I really understand why you'd feel that way. And then you could say, if I was a parent, I imagine that I would feel the same, okay? So you can start to at least relate to their role as a parent, okay? And then another one is, look, it's got to be hard on you when you aren't there to smooth the way for your child or whatever. Sometimes, you know, parents feel like if I'm not there to help my child, especially if the child has learning disabilities or special needs of some kind and they're not there, that, you know, it's like trying to feel out what exactly is going on, especially if they feel like something has gone wrong with the way their child is being treated or taught or whatever the situation is. So it's hard on parents when they're not there to smooth that way. Somebody's sleepy. If you can go ahead and mute your line. Hang on, I'll try and do that. Oh, I went too far. Hang on. Let me, hang on a second. Let me, oh, we've got a lot of people join us. So I'm gonna, everyone. Okay. Okay, that should be better. Can you all still hear me? Can a few people nod their heads? Okay, great, thank you. All right. Okay, so this is probably the most powerful way to connect and empathize with what the parent's going through at the time. And so this is one of the key things. Of all of the strategies, I would make sure somewhere in there, the ones like I said in the beginning, you can pick and choose, they're not sequential, but this is one that I would definitely use every single time, making sure you're making some kind of connection and validating their experience as a parent with their child. Okay. Okay, and then you want to validate the positive intent in someone's comments or actions, even if we think they missed the mark. Okay, so this is where we start to say things like, Mrs. P, you're concerned about your child being successful, so are we. So it's like validating the positive intent of an action that maybe another adult took, a volunteer took with the child, or another child. It could be peer-to-peer, it could be, you know, volunteer to child, whatever the situation is. Just starting to validate that there was a positive intent in whatever that adult or whatever the action was that the parent is complaining about. It's like sometimes they, you know, forget that we're all on the same page here and we all want the same things for our kids. And so this is the step where you start to do that. So Mr. S, you want your child to be and feel safe, and we work hard and for it to make sure that everyone feels and is safe. And then you can talk more about the specific situations, but these are your intro phrases, and you can talk specifically about what happened and, you know, how for whatever 4-H believes should be the best practice in whatever that situation is. So it's hard in these situations to be specific because we're not talking about a specific situation, but this is starting to get to that validating the positive intent, because you also, as you know, staff want to support your volunteers. And so we're not ever going to say something that isn't supportive of your volunteer, but also when we get to solutions in a couple minutes, we'll talk about how you do that. Okay. All right, we'll move on. So, of course, as with a lot of the other ones, there is a danger here. So be certain about what you hear as an underlying or hidden concern. So you want to make sure that you're identifying the intent of the actions of a volunteer, other youth member, and then making sure that you're validating the right concern of the parent. And that came up a few steps ago when we talked about finding that hidden thread, okay, or finding the hidden concern. And at this point, you don't want to try to solve something that you haven't identified correctly. That's the thing. You could reach the solution of something that isn't even the problem if you haven't really gotten to identifying the hidden concern yet, okay? In most cases, if you haven't identified and solved the hidden issue, the complaint will just keep resurfacing in a new way, right? So you think you've solved it, you leave the conversation, and 2 weeks later, the parent is still complaining about another thing and another thing and another thing. So that's your kind of your hint or your major clue or big red flag that says, okay, we didn't get to the main concern. We thought we had it, but it really wasn't it. So now you need to go back and really figure out what that hidden concern is because you didn't get to it yet. And that's okay. Sometimes it takes a couple, tries at this to really get to that hidden concern. Sometimes they're obvious and sometimes they're not so obvious, okay? The next step is to make them right, okay? So affirming whatever part, and it could be a really small part of what the parent is saying to you or believe that we can as a way of neutralizing the adversarial posture. So basically, you're gonna say things like, I believe you, Mrs. P. I'm sure she doesn't do this at home. Kids can act very different in different settings. So if there's, if someone has complained about their child and they're complaining because the complaint was filed about their child, this happens occasionally in our program where we have a complaint about a behavior of a child and then that child's parents complain because there's a complaint, right? So they're dealing with that. So kids can be different in different settings. And then you can talk about that's common. And then how can we work to solutions so that your child and all the kids in 4-H are successful in their program? Or Mr. S, you're absolutely right. Janie is a sensitive child, which is why she needs our help, not overreacting and feeling so hurt so much of the time. So sometimes we have, sensitive kids who overreact to things. And so then if that's a conversation with the parent that a volunteer is having, a parent can get defensive, that's my kid, but you can say, we're here to help them, right, in good positive youth development, overcome some of their self-regulation. We're teaching them how to do that. And so we're all concerned about that. And we want to make sure that we're all working on the same goals to help that child be successful in whatever goals that the family and the child has for themselves. Okay, so once again, sometimes it's finding just one part of what the parent is saying that you can agree with, and you want to figure out ways to make them right. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a second. Has people used other strategies to help make the parents right? Other phrases you've used, things that work for you? I've been stopping occasionally to ask this question for those of you that joined us a little later. Okay, seeing nothing in the chat pod, we'll go ahead and move on. So then you want to finish with getting to resolution, right? So we want to use some phrases that I use. Here's what we can do to help Jose. Do you think that's a place to start? So this is where you're developing the plan. These are the things that we can do to help Jose be successful. And then you want to list whatever they are and then check in. Do you think that's a place to start with the parent and let them agree with you or come up with some others? Or here's something you can do. Sometimes if this is an issue that's getting to your desk, here's what I will do at the next, or a volunteer could use this too. Here's what I will do at the next club meeting to help all the members understand the code of conduct. Sometimes it might mean a visit from you. If it gets to your desk, the parent wants you to take some action with the club leader oftentimes, right? Oftentimes now it's become a complaint against the club leader or the project leader. And so then you can step in and say, here's what I'll do. I'll go visit a project meeting, I'll go visit a club meeting, and I'll meet with the leaders and we'll do some coaching. Oftentimes, that's all that parents really want, okay? But if you still don't know what they want, this is one of my favorite questions. What would you like to have happen? So that's checking in with the parents about what they think should happen here. Now, you'll get all kinds of answers, right, when you open the door to this question. And so you just need to be prepared for those answers and be prepared to say, Well, we can't do all of that. Like, we're not going to expel the child for that behavior because kids don't have good breaks, right? They make mistakes, and we're here to help all kids learn together about having self-control and self-regulating, all the things, whatever phrases work for you, whatever's going on in the situation. And so we're going to have the kids work together to solve this problem, if that's appropriate. And certainly, I think one of the things that we need to focus some attention on in the coming years with all of our volunteers is helping them help kids have good conflict resolution skills. A lot of times we intervene as adults and we just say, cut it out, move on. And because especially in 4-H, I think, especially in project meeting, you're trying to get something done and you have basically a lesson plan of some kind. And it's sometimes hard to stop and say, okay, I need to just put the lesson plan aside and really work on this conflict resolution or peacemaking within my project today, because that's what's more important. And so I think we need some really good training there for our project leaders and club leaders in the future about helping them help kids solve their own conflicts, because that's really what we're trying to get to, is having kids have good conflict resolution skills in whatever setting they're in. Okay, and then at this point you want to agree to any follow-up letter, follow-up or responses. If you promise to do something, say I'll attend the next club meeting, then you want to follow up and say, sometimes you can do this in a letter, sometimes you'll need a letter that says, these are the things we agreed to, and I will go to the club meeting and I'll talk to the leaders and I'll do some coaching with them, whatever needs to happen. Let's see, there's a chat here. Let's see if there's a question. How does this intervention comply with 4-H policy and conflict resolution procedure? So, Claudia, hang on to that question a second, but I will get back to that and I'll answer that, okay? So we'll come back to that. So be prompt with your follow-up. If you set dates for when these will happen, be sure to follow up with that. If you can't meet an agreed deadline, be sure and let the parent know that you couldn't meet that for whatever reason, and then set a new date, because things happen in all of our lives and sometimes we can't meet the agreed upon date that we originally chose, and people get sick, things happen, and so that can happen. Just be sure and follow up with that parent. So with that, I hope there are donuts in your future. Those are kind of the end of our strategies, and now I'm gonna, we'll deal with some questions, and I'm going to unmute you all too, but you can use the chat pod. But I'll answer Claudia's first. How does this intervention comply with the 4-H policy and conflict resolution procedure? So Claudia, right now the conflict, it's called the complaint process. So that is still in place at the moment. And I don't think it's going to change too much. But on July 1st, I think most of you know that we've been working on some conflict resolution volunteer management systems that are going to be A&R division-wide. So not only will 4-H be using these practices, but master gardeners as well as master food preservers. Anybody that has volunteers as agents will be using these procedures. So we've been working for the last 6 months from a directive from our president of the university to align our volunteer management practices. So many of those will roll out on July 1. So, and I know Shannon and Whitney have been talking about some of them as we've been moving through this spring and the past winter. So those will be coming in a virtual brown bag. So they will align with the current complaint processes. So we'll still have the forms and all of that, but there will be a flow chart that helps you understand when you start to have conversations with, in many cases it's with volunteers. You're not going to talk with parents necessarily. I don't know how often you all do conflict resolution with parents. It sounds to me that it's more frequent than I think it is directly, but it certainly would start with the club leader. So what we're trying to say is conflict management should happen at the lowest common place. And so if it's a conflict between two parents, those two parents need to work it out. If it's a conflict between a parent and the club leader, then the club leader and the parent need to work it out. And if they can't come to agreement, then it escalates to your desk, and then it escalates to your advisor's desk, and then to the county director, so it just goes up the chain. And at some place where it escalates into continued behavior, where it affects a wide group of people and not just 2 people, if it affects the whole club or the whole county or however situations get extended, especially people using social media, you know how things can get blown way out of proportion there, then you involve me in the conversation. And so I can come in and meet with parents as needed. We try not, you want to save me though until, you know, way late in the game, because we want to try and solve these things at the lowest common denominator. Okay, Claudia, did that answer your question? Okay, great. So the other questions, thoughts, concerns, curiosities? Okay, you're welcome, Tracy. This was a short one today. I knew it might be, but I wasn't sure. Does anyone have a situation you want to use as a test case, something you want to practice with? And you can do that with me anytime. You don't have to do it publicly now. If you have something that's, you know, come up and you want to say, hey, I tried this and it didn't work. Can can we work through some of these strategies together and see what that would sound like? If you need some specific help, please be sure and call on me. Okay. And as I said in the beginning, I'm going to share this whole slide deck with the notes. So you don't see the notes, of course, on this page, but it'll have the notes so you can actually train your club leaders, your other key volunteers. Using this PowerPoint, you can tweak it however you want. Most of the work of this presentation came from Bob Ditter, who's a clinical psychologist. He has a practice in Boston, Massachusetts. I worked with Bob for quite a number of years, and this is comes out of some of his work. And then one more resource is dealing with an angry parent, which is just a Edutopia article. Oh, the training I mentioned earlier is called Crucial Conversations. I'm going to go ahead and type it in here. And they just did one about a month ago. And so I would look for it in about 6 months to come up again. Okay. I expect there will be great pushback. Pushback about what, Tracy? Look above. Oh, sorry. Next week, I'm going to a club to explain they cannot donate to Sober Grad Night. Okay, yeah. So, oh, it's our policy on donating to other organizations, right? And so, and that policy, I don't know if there's good explanations on our website about why that is. I think it's in the FAQ about why that is, but oftentimes we want to make sure that they understand that we're also a charitable organization. So one charitable organization earning money for another is not really a good practice. We want to make sure you're giving to 4-H, not just of your time and of your money as well. And so the money that they use to raise money is university money, and it can't be used that way. So it's, yeah, it might be a little tough. But what they can do, and you can say what they can do, right? They can't donate money, but they can donate stuff. So they can take the money that they earned through their whatever fundraiser that they did. And if the Sober Grad Night, I'm sure they need, they might need cups and plates and decorations and whatever. So they can actually buy that stuff and donate the stuff to Sober Grad Night. So oftentimes that's enough for them to understand that they still made a difference to Sober Grad Night. They can buy stuff with the money that they made. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but that sometimes will help them go. They just have to do the purchasing with their money. Okay. Can they buy if the money's already in the treasury? Sure. Yeah. You mean it's already in there, they deposited in the bank? They would just need to make an adjustment to their budget, and budgets are, they're changeable. You just have to vote that you're going to purchase items to donate for Sober Grad Night. Yeah, and it's still fine. It doesn't have to be, because if you don't bank it, then that could also be a problem, because then it could look like you're kind of breaking the rules really on how you spend your funds. You want to be upfront and transparent with how the money is spent. And so putting it in the bank and then making a line item in their budget that they're buying supplies to donate to Sober Grad Night is fine, as long as they're purchasing the items themselves. And this happens a lot with, you know, all kinds of things. And so you can't donate to, you know, you can't donate to the animal shelter. You can't write them a check, but you can go buy pet toys. You can buy dog food. You can buy bedding. You can buy whatever the shelter needs. You can go purchase things and donate those things with that money that you've earned. You just cannot transfer the funds directly to them. Because oftentimes when you're fundraising, here's the other reason. When you're fundraising and you're out in the public and you're raising money and you're there for 4-H, people think they're giving to 4-H. They don't really understand that you're really raising money for Sober Grad Night, okay, which they may not want to donate to. They think they're giving money to 4-H kids in their cute little uniforms. So that's where it becomes a problem, because we can't always guarantee that we've been transparent to the donor, especially if it's kids raising money, right, representing 4-H. And so that's where it becomes tricky. But those kids can go buy stuff to donate to the organization, because then they're still donating to 4-H to do work of 4-H, which is giving back to the community. So then it makes it a little more in keeping with our mission and our goals. Okay. Okay, anything else? All right, great. So we're gonna end here. As I said, you can always, you know, give me a call, send me an email, whatever works for you, and we can have continued conversations. You will start seeing more and more of these options. I think our goal with this training is to get this training online through e-extension within the next year. And we'll have some more engaging things for volunteers to be engaged in. It won't just be a straight presentation, of course. It'll be more like our others, where it's more engaged in the presentation. And one more thing, sorry, there's always one more thing, right? So if you do this with volunteers, what I would do is build in some scenarios. I would, you know, create scenarios and have them do some role play to answer those questions and to work through some of the strategies. And so if you come up with some good scenarios and role plays, let us know. And if you need help developing them, let me know, and we'll work together on those. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.